The year was 1982. Late Night with David Letterman debuted on NBC. Chariots of Fire won the Best Picture at the 54th Academy Awards, and the San Francisco 49ers won the first Super Bowl. That was also the year that audiences first encountered the great John Rambo. First Blood, released in 1982, was the pinnacle action film of its day, launching a franchise and generating a series of films that will be released in the following years. John Wick might be the current reigning one-man killing machine in the market right now, but Rambo was the mean machine who started it way back in 1982 with First Blood. More than 3 decades later, in 2019, John Rambo gears up for a 5th outing, supposedly his last, as the title Last Blood would suggest. But it's always never say never with this mercenary, even though the director of the 5th film has strongly stated that this 5th outing is supposed to close the circle on Rambo's story, hoping that it would serve as a suitable conclusion to the franchise. Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to talk about the upcoming Rambo New Blood, based on the popular action film series starring Sylvester Stallone as a Vietnam veteran who uses his military training for vigilante justice. We're super excited to see how this will turn out, and we hope you're too, so let's get into it. Rambo 6 plot. What can it be about? Rambo has been a franchise since when studios were still learning about the massive commercial prospects of one, and before the whole world pounced on making one of their popular properties into a string of sequels, eventually leading to the formation of entire interconnected universes. Rambo, in that sense, has had an uneven history, with the first 3 films being released in fairly equitable intervals, with First Blood out in 1982, followed by First Blood Chapter 2 in 1985, and Rambo 3 in 1988, thus closing the trilogy. The franchise was revived again 20 years later in 2008, with Stallone taking the reins in his own hands, directing the feature film himself, often regarded as the best in the entire franchise. 11 years later, the Rambo films finally get around to showing an aged John Rambo, but not worn down. The trailer for the 5th one, playing to the tune of Old Town Road, shows him in pretty solid form, taking legions of men down on his own and with a little help from some improvised booby traps and of course his beloved dagger. The franchise has never been too hot with the critics, except maybe the 1st and the 4th one, but has managed to turn in decent profits to the tune of $727 million in total worldwide collections, which is not too shabby considering a franchise that's run its course over 37 years. The second is unequivocally the most profitable one, minting $300 million internationally, but the franchise has been on a downer ever since in terms of business. It would thus not be too far-fetched a statement when I say that the future of the franchise would depend on how well the 5th one does. Even if the support is unanimous on the public front, that hasn't necessarily translated to great returns, with the 4th movie bringing in only $113 million in worldwide collections, indicating that the audience might be feigning interest in seeing these films at the theaters, despite an ever-loyal fanbase that Stallone still enjoys to date. The 5th one indicates not a very different story, with the film standing at a dismal 37% on Rotten Tomatoes as of now, despite only roughly half of the reviews turned in by today. Much of the criticism of the film was directed towards its portrayal of Mexico and Mexicans, its non-existent storyline, and a lot of bloodshed and stomach-churning violence that served little to no purpose plot-wise. If the reviews are anything to go by, it may be time for the franchise to back up if the box office collections, both domestic and international, don't add up too well. Coming to the possible plot of the 6th installment of the film, if it happens, could be either a direct sequel or a prequel, as expressed by Stallone himself. If it happens to be a direct sequel, it may not be able to afford the same time jump that Last Blood was able to afford, 11 years to be precise. At the same time, Rambo is shown to have aged just as much, so the film, if it happens, would have to be invariably set within the next 2 to 3 years in real time. If not, there is always a prequel route to take, one that Stallone wants to be set even before the events of First Blood, before the Vietnam War, which is often seen as a major turning point in who John Rambo was as a person. Regarding the same, Stallone had this to say: "I always thought of Rambo when he was 16 or 17. I hope they can do the prequel. He was the best person you could find. He was the captain of the team. He was the most popular kid in school, a super athlete. He was like Jim Thorpe, and the war is what changed him. If you saw him before, he was like the perfect guy." It would seem like Stallone himself is quite game for future movies to pan out, and regardless of his age or personal involvement in the cast himself, he would want these movies to go on. I can smell another Creed like a spin-off. Can you? Who could be in it? Owing to the significant temporal shift here, 11 years for the 5th film, the cast for The Last Blood is composed of all new cast members except the one constant Sylvester Stallone. Apart from him, even if it's a direct sequel, I hardly think anybody else from the original cast of Last Blood would show up, especially none of the bad guys, considering the body count Rambo leaves in Last Blood. Who could be behind it? Tough to predict again, because the truth here is that none of the Rambo movies have had recurring directors helming them. The 4th one, of course, was directed by Stallone himself, so at this moment, he would prove to be our best bet for returning as director. Of course, Stallone here too is responsible for his legend, having co-written all 5 films in the franchise, and I don't think that's going to change, be it the Rocky Balboa films or this series. Rambo 6 release date. When can it premiere? As I've stated before, the Rambo movies don't seem to have a very fixed timeline, with each successive entry solely dependent on the financial success of the previous one. Assuming that a 6th one is made and it is a direct sequel, it has to be made within the next 2 years for obvious reasons. If the makers and Stallone decide to opt for a prequel route, it could be anything between the next 2 to 5 years, depending on Stallone's involvement, and more importantly, depending on the performance of Last Blood at the ticket windows. What story could Rambo 6 tell? There are 2 different directions Rambo 6 could take. It could be set after Rambo Last Blood and see Rambo drift into a new situation, echoing the story of the original First Blood, or it could be a prequel focusing on Rambo's time in Vietnam. In fact, Stallone himself expressed interest in a Rambo prequel before, showcasing the transformation of the character from an all-American golden boy to a broken warrior. The prospective downside of the prequel route would be the obvious need to recast John Rambo with another actor. Stallone is so iconic as a character, it's hard to imagine anyone else could fill his shoes, even for a younger and a vastly different take on the legendary soldier. Perhaps Rambo 6 could combine both ideas, using Stallone in the present day while intermittently flashing back to his younger days with a more youthful actor playing the role. It's possible that he could then meet with the children or grandchildren of one of his old Baker team squad mates and relay stories of hell and heroism to a new generation. Another route Rambo 6 could take is reviving the cancelled version of Rambo 5 developed by Stallone and First Blood author David Morrell. That's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Rambo New Blood. What do you think of this TV series? Are you looking forward to it? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.